And then by 2023, it's expected to exceed more than $2 billion. 2 billion smackaroonies from ad revenue from voice.
Welcome to Soundboard with Tofe. Here you'll learn all things podcasting to help you connect with your audience. And here's your host, Tofe Evans.
Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Soundboard with Tofe podcast. Now we are 2 months into this little project of mine, and I am incredibly grateful to have you joining along the journey. I could not do this without you. And this is obviously a project that is something a bit of fun for me to speak what's on my mind, give a little bit of value to you, share the insights of what has worked, what hasn't worked, behind the scenes. And something that I would like to talk about today is around podcasting revenue. It's something that a lot of people that's starting out podcasts are always wondering, how much can I make from podcasts, or what are the ways to monetize with my voice? Now, I want to shed light on an article I have read from the IAB, also known as the Interactive Advertising Bureau. They have written an article based on data from a PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, survey about how much ad revenue has grown in 2020 and what's predicted to 2023. Now, note, these are based on US podcasts, but I feel like the blueprint is very similar to what's going to happen in Australia and other parts of the world. But it is incredibly interesting on what findings have been found. Here is something that is actually said from the article, that podcasting advertising will grow as much in the next 2 years as it did in the past decade. So if you look at a graph, the trajectory it's kind of like at an inflection point that I find. It's going through some exponential growth just because how much the podcasting scene has erupted in the last 3 years. Look, podcasting's been around for a while now, but more people are using this medium to share their message, share stories, talking about anecdotes, talking about insights and more of like a news format. And it makes perfect sense why people consume them, because they can listen to them when they're commuting or when they're out walking or when they're cooking. It's a bit of a time saver to learn something new. Now, this is how much podcasting ad revenue has grown. So in the year of 2020, it grew by 19% year on year. And for 2021, how's this? It's set to exceed $1 billion this year in ad revenue. This is just for American podcasts. And then by 2023, it's expected to exceed more than $2 billion. 2 billion smackaroonies from ad revenue from voice. That is astounding, preposterous, you could almost even say. Now, how the hell does podcasting ad revenue work? Well, thank you for asking. Now, there are multiple ways that this is done, but, well, the most common ones are the cost per click model. That's based on a podcasting hosting platform paying you because of how many views you get. Then there's the whole sponsorship plug where brand will give podcaster or creative X amount of money if you mention our podcast or if you give us like social media plugs. And in this case, it would be a recording. This is what it would sound like. Here's an example.
This episode is brought to you by Peak, where plants and science intersect. Go to peaktea.com/impact. You'll get 5% off your first order. And use code IMPACT at checkout to get free shipping. Enjoy the episode.
That's what one would sound like. And these can come at the start of the podcast, or this can come at the middle, which is known as a mid-roll, or it can come at the end. And then the other ways of leveraging is via merch, or you could do public speaking or lead generation. So that goes into more of that's more client-based. So for an example would be someone really likes this podcast and they're like, I really enjoy what you're talking about. I would love for you to be a client of yours if you can help edit mine, or I'd love for you to do my podcast strategy. That's an example of lead generation in this case. So based off this article, there are a few highlights to mention, and this is based around stats and data that they've found. A big one is the mid-roll spot placements, so very similar to the ad you heard before that happens halfway throughout the episode. It's continued to account for 3/4 or 76% of revenues. That is insane. And I think I know why. And it's mainly because there are a lot of podcasters that do the ads at the start of an episode. The thing I don't like about that is there's specific podcasters, but I just don't like their adpocalypse, where they blast 4.5 minutes of ads when they could do it halfway through. And they actually do it halfway through as well, some of them. But to spend so much of the podcast episode in ads, it can really turn off the listener, because all they think is, I'm not getting much value from this because all they're doing is plugging ads. Look, there is always a time and place for it, because these guys are collaborating with the brands that they want to, so that it funds their podcast and it also gives them a revenue stream. But sometimes it's a bit too much when it's like 5 minutes of ads. Now, based on that, half of podcast ads lasted longer than 30 seconds in length. It's a seller's perspective. What they're doing is they're realizing that if you go too long, it's just going to really turn people off. However, longer ads allow for creative storytelling. So when someone can actually put themselves in the shoes of using the product and it can resonate with the listener, that's pretty impressive when you can turn them into a hot lead, into a buyer of that sponsor. It's great because whether they have an affiliate or they paid out directly with a lump sum of money, it's great for brands that want to work with creatives. Am I going to get my return on investment if I give you an X amount of money? So usually the affiliate route will go where if you sign up to my link, you'll get 10% of the sales that come through when people click on your link. The big key takeaway with all of this, and I'm just going to read it straight from the article. The big key takeaway from consumer behavior pre, during, and post-pandemic is that podcasting has tremendous growth ahead. Consumers love listening and will integrate it into their lives wherever it fits. Advertisers love the flexibility to adjust their messaging on the fly. And most importantly, brands are continuing to shift to podcasting simply because it works. When they run an ad, the cash register rings. So that was said from Eric John, who is the Vice President of IAB, which is Interactive Advertising Bureau. And he also mentioned that podcasting will grow in the next 2 years by leaps and bounds. I think anyone that has been noticing podcasting, at least in the last 3 years, has noticed how much it's exploded. I think that's the best way. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, everyone has a podcast, all this, all that. But this is where I think, and I don't want to sound biased, but I'm with him on this. And that's because if you're working in a company, in the marketing team, or you're looking to enhance your personal brand, podcasting is actually one of the best ways to go about it, because you can use your literal voice, this little mouthpiece that we all have on our face, and use it to talk about any stories that we've got, because people love stories. It's actually the number one reason why we neurobiologically connect. We can relate to someone, and think of any book that you love or any movie or any speaker. We relate to those people because of their ability to storytell. And as well as that, so many people listen to podcasts anyway. It's going to be the go-to medium on how they consume information. So why not create a podcast and make it realistic based on your time frame? We've spoken about this in previous episodes, where you're doing it to give value. It's essentially to increase your brand awareness. By focusing on giving value, what that does in the long term, you can make revenue from that. Then you can be in that stat of how much revenue has been made. But don't go in with the notion of, I'm going to start this podcast because I'm going to make so much money. You've lost. It's like going into business with that mentality. It comes as a byproduct. So focus on giving value, and then the money will come afterwards. And then you can focus on, what does leverage look like? Well, leverage could be, I'm going to get the sponsor on board, or I'm going to do it to get lead generation. Whatever the situation is, focus on giving value. Hopefully this inspired you to think about starting a podcast if you haven't done one already, just because of all the opportunity that can come from it. Like literally $2 billion plus by 2023 from podcasting monetization. That is insane. And that's just in the US. Like imagine in Australia or in Canada or anywhere in Europe or the UK. There's just a lot of opportunity. And I think that's the key point here. You're doing it to create brand awareness, and it can create opportunity for yourself. Anyway, I'm going to wrap that up there. Thank you for listening. All I can ask is please share this with someone else that would find value of this, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening, and remember, your voice matters. Soundboard acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, paying respects to elders past, present, and emerging.